Yes, you can have a seat already. So thank you very much coming back to the workshop. As we have a bit of time conflict with the ESFRI, and I assume that some of you will participating as well to the ESFRI, we have been asked if it would be possible to shift the question session and to put this and to provide more time within the panels, and then it would be much more practical that we have the expert already sitting here, and you can please ask your question directly after each panel. I think this would be much more convenient for everybody. So now let us go further to the next panel. And I would like to introduce you to Immaculada Fuerga, who will moderate the next panel about funding and socio-economic impact. Immaculada is Deputy Vice Director General for Internationalization of Science and Innovation within the Ministry of Science, Innovation and Universities of Spain. And Immaculada is also a member of the Executive Board of ESFRI. And now I will give you the floor. Thank you.
Is this already working? Yeah. Okay, so I'm glad to be here with you today for this second panel. In this second panel, we are going to discuss about funding and socioeconomic impact. I think these are aspects really important for the project, for the new project, and for the projects that are in the preparatory phase in order to work with them, because finally are essential for the creation of the infrastructures. We are going to talk about the need and importance of adequate business plan, and we will have here people that has worked a lot on that, and now they succeed with this task, because it was not easy. Also, we are going to discuss about the definition of measurable and credible key performance indicators, the necessity and importance of stakeholder commitments, and the meaning of the socioeconomic impact for the research infrastructures. For this, we have here a panel composed by three nice colleagues. The first one is Ilaria Nardello. Ilaria Nardello is the Executive Director of the European Marine Biological Resources Center, EMBRC. That is the Distributed Pan-European Research Infrastructure Consortium for Marine Biology and Ecology Research. She has a background in biological oceanography. She has been working at the interface between science and industry, so she can help us in this approach also during 10 years, including the coordination of the IRIS Marine Biotechnology Program and the Industry Research Specialist activities at the National Universities of Ireland, Galway. She went on to be a founder and Chief Executive Officer of the Biomarine International Cluster Association under the auspices of Prince Albert II Foundation in Monaco, to develop and organize the economic value of sustainable and innovative value chains from marine bioresources. She holds a PhD in ecology and management of the biological resources and is one of the authors in Renewable Matter, an international magazine on the bioeconomy and circular economy. Welcome.
Thank you.
Our second speaker is Elina Griniese. She works for the European Future Innovation System, and she's going to discuss with us about the socioeconomic impact of research infrastructures. Elina's background is in interdisciplinary studies on society, science, and technology. Previously, she has worked for the European Commission, DG Research and Innovation, dealing with research and innovation policy. She has worked also in the Research and Innovation Policy Consultancy Technopolis Group, and currently is the principal researcher at Brussels-based Policy Lab European Future Innovation System Center, as well as an independent expert for the DG Research and Innovation. Elina has carried out a wide range of policy studies, evaluations, and impact assessment at European and national level. Her research interests include new policy approaches for tackling systematic societal challenge and novel impact assessment methods of research and innovation policies. Welcome to the panel, Elina. Currently, she is the project manager of the Horizon 2020 REPATH. That is the project that aims to provide to the funders of the research infrastructures and managers with tools to assess the research infrastructure impact on the economy and the contribution to the society. Our third speaker is Ornella De Giacomo. She is the Deputy Executive Director of ERIC. She has a degree in food energy and a PhD in nanotechnology. She has worked on technology transfer, and before joining ERIC, she worked for several years at Electra Synchrotron Trieste in activities related with user programs, projects, and policies. She is also a member of the Scientific Council of ERIS, our infrastructure, ERIS in France. So, with any further delay, I will like to pass the floor to the first speaker, Ilaria.
Thank you.
Please. I will, yes, I would like to request to you to be very
concise.
Pragmatic, concise, and clear in order to.
I'll try.
To get benefit of your talk.
Okay, so in this session, we discuss about the importance of funding, socioeconomic impact, and sustainability, I guess, in the end of the research infrastructures and our experience. This is the experience of myself and EMBRC in their transition from preparatory to implementation and then to operational phase this year. I would say that one thing to start bearing in mind from the beginning is that we have a particular object in our hands to deal with when we're constructing an ERIC or a research infrastructure. You have seen also from Harry's presentation, you have a choice of legal structure to choose from. However, all of those entities are entail, let's say, a responsibility to conduct an enterprise. On the other hand, we all know that what motivates or what drives these projects, these initiatives forward, since the very beginning, are the scientific minds, the scientific drive to answer questions or to support scientific endeavors. So you realize immediately that there is a bit of a dualism or a tension between these two very different natured objects. One is the scientific mind and the other is the enterprise, the company-like approach. So these objects, these research infrastructure enterprises, are actually tasked with the duty to become sustainable, to prove their sustainability, which means in the end to be self-sufficient, right? However, there are some good news about this and some less good news about this. The good news is that if everything goes well, you will have a lot of support. And you need to learn how to get that support, though, how to leverage it, how to make your story credible so that support will be given to you. And on the other hand, there are aspects of this sustainability that are really ingrained. I would say they are just what you would expect from any company. Therefore, you should be able to convince your users, your market, to buy your services, to buy your products. So while this is a very different jargon from what we're typically used to as scientists, or even as ministries, this is a bit of the mentality you need to embrace, and you can soften it as much as you like. But at the end of the day, you need to think along lines of customer satisfaction for your services, and you need to deliver a service that has a quality that allows the goals of your research infrastructure to actually justify the investment that has been made to bring it into life. I thought that the business planning exercise that was suggested is not mandatory, but it was suggested from a European Investment Bank representative, Antonella Calvia-Goetz, was a very difficult, if you want, exercise, an exercise that required a lot of energy and required a lot of thinking. But I thought that this, and I would recommend that will be my main recommendation for today. If you are in the process of defining your infrastructure, so if you're in a preparatory phase and you're thinking of defining your business model, your business plan, and where your strengths are and what you're going to deliver and how you're going to deliver that, and where does the money come from and where does the money go, what does it bring, what is it transformed into, and what does that product bring back into the life of the research infrastructure. Well, if you want to tackle all those questions, and they are vital for your sustainability, for your storytelling, for your credibility, then I would invite you to look at this template for a business plan for an ERIC. And we found the exercise daunting, really excruciating at some points, because it really brings you to think things you never considered before. And I say this with a mentality that was already quite prone to industry. So I would be a person who has supported some industry spin-up of some small companies, let's not say industries. And so I would already have quite a good mentality, if you want, a natural approach to this. However, the detail requested to go through this exercise are large, and on the other hand, at the same time, they are very rewarding. At the end of your process, which may take maybe a year, you will find in time that all the answers you look for constantly, or that your stakeholders may be looking for, or that your staff may be looking for, well, all the answers are actually in that business plan. And that will be a really good drive, a really good guide to your process, to your establishment, to continually have something to refer to when you're not sure which direction to take. Of course, business plans, like anything else, can be changed. And so they will be subject to revision every time, every year. Every 3 years, maybe you will produce something a bit more consistent. You will review this plan more in depth and you will prepare a new one. But the initial business plan will contain the key elements that will drive you forward, will contain a vision. And a vision is considering who you are now, considering your strengths, and your weaknesses as well. Where do you want to be in a few years' time? If you cannot answer this question, you cannot even start writing a business plan. So this is your first question, and it sets the scene for you and for everybody in your environment. So I will leave it at that, and then we'll see if there are questions. Mm-hmm.
For the creation of, what are the key elements
of the business plan?
on the creation of this business plan that you can share with the audience?
I can share. I can share. Actually, I thought a bit too late that perhaps I could have projected the. So first element that I just mentioned is the vision. The vision, your mission. So articulate this images. They're really images. The vision is an image of how you see yourself. It's an imagination. And then the business plan is all that is required to get there. So once you have your vision and mission, then you will have your objectives and a strategy to reach those objectives. And a user strategy, which considers, in fact, who are the persons you propose this, this vision to. And of course, the governance is a key element, and we discussed this earlier, and you have had a glimpse of the diversity that there can be in governance models. There isn't one. So you can make choices, and there is your liberty, your freedom to try to arrange this plan as it suits best your personal experience, your needs, because each infrastructure is very different from distributed to centralized, and within the distributed, many different needs or organization types. And then we, in this template, we also consider the management and the human resources. Of course, the management is the life of the research infrastructure day to day, and the staff, the human resources are. There are if you look into the perspectives that are offered by either the ERIC Forum, which are all the ERICs already established, or the Commission, or ESFRI, you will find a lot of guidance on what is good for the ERICs, for the establishment of these research infrastructures. I found that the ESFRI monitoring process was particularly useful in indicating where the accent should go, what aspects should really be detailed, and where our efforts in defining things should go. And then, of course, in any business plan, we will not forget the financial aspects. So financial and funding framework is a key element. It comes at the end, almost at the end of this exercise, and it's the worst part, depending on your nature, perhaps. But the complexity of the research infrastructure funding is such that actually to define the sources that sustain you is not easy, and you will find that you can count on core resources and also on extramural funding. Core resources typically are the ones of your stakeholders, the governments, if you're an ERIC especially, whereas you can also have projects that support you. And if you want to expand, yeah, it may be true that you can count maybe on the medium term on government support, but if you want to expand, if you have an ambition to develop, you will need to do more than count on the support of your stakeholders and really move into the space of services and projects and become a dynamic entity that relies on its own ability to imagine its future and bringing it about. And that's it, I would say.
Now, for the second speaker, we are going to deal with all the aspects related with the socio-economical impact. So, Elina, please.
Yes, hello. My intervention this afternoon will be on the topic of socio-economic impact of research infrastructures that over the years has gained a bit of increasing importance and, I think, attention. I represent a project, RI Path, which is a dedicated Horizon 2020 project on this topic. It has been launched in January 2018, so we are in a run-up phase of the project and will last another 2 years. But in my talk, I will sketch a bit of landscape view that we have from the first analysis of practices at national, European and global level on impact assessment of research infrastructures. Then I will give a couple of notes on the meaning of impact, because that was the title of the presentation. I think it's important to come back to the concept of impact. And then in conclusion, I will offer some of the considerations that we take into account in our project. And I think it will be also interesting for you to know what's in the preparation and where we are heading with this work. So when we look at the status of or the practices, existing practices of the socioeconomic impact, we see that except from a couple of countries and an EU level rules upon funding application, there isn't really well-defined impact assessment guidelines from policymakers and from funding agencies that research infrastructures could look and see what impact areas should I look at when I have to make my impact assessment, what are the methodologies I should think of. So there's a bit of void in that respect. Also, what we see that despite we have good narratives, what is the real impact area? We also saw in the new ESFRI Roadmap nice narratives about where do ESFRI research infrastructures really contribute. We still have very diverging understandings in the way that we define and also describe impacts. On top of that, there's also proliferation of different methodologies and approaches that are used to scope and measure impacts, and that's obviously as a result of the lack of more unified guidelines. So if you are a new project and you are being tasked to think about your socioeconomic impact, I think you're left a bit in wild in order where to start. So there's this lack of more uniform framework how to approach this issue. So this is exactly the topic of the RI Path project. So what we aim to do is to develop tools for research infrastructure managers, policymakers, and funders to assess the impact on the economy and contribution to society. And with tools, I mean concepts, I mean also very operational things like guidance, I mean also methodological toolbox. And the reason or the main emphasis of the project is that, as I already said, while we have a narrative of what is the possible impact or what is currently what we see the impact areas where research infrastructures contribute, what we don't know as a community of research infrastructures and evaluators are these long-term causal impact pathways, or what are the mechanisms of how these impacts come about, how they diffuse, or how do we understand them in more detail? Why that is important? Well, it's important to understand these mechanisms, not just to quantify some sort of nice statistics about our effects on the economy and society. The mechanisms are super important for you as the research infrastructure community to really manage your potential impact, or to really develop procedures to maximize your impact. So there's much more about learning aspect than just the measurement and accountability to our funders. When we talk about impact, and that's a general, I think, general observations, I think we have a tendency to very swiftly jump to indicators and also to have a bit statistic understanding of impact. What I want to remind to everyone that impacts are not indicators. Impacts are processes, and they diffuse through various interactions. They also need certain conditions for dissemination. So there is a lot of dynamics in there. On top of that, obviously, many impacts have diverse time span for materialization. So there could be impacts that can come about quite quickly, for instance, impacts on employment through to construction phase, but some impacts from fundamental research might materialize in very, very long time frame. So that's another difficulty that's on top of this process orientation. Another dimension that adds to this picture is that many of these impacts are intangible. And I think that is what puzzles research infrastructures, that is what puzzles also evaluator community, because we try to come up with more precise methods to capture that. But what I want to mention that the fact that these impacts are intangible doesn't mean they are somewhat less relevant. It's already now recognized that research infrastructures, and especially large ones, do have an effect on community building and also on creating networks. That's, I think, is already established fact. But exactly this, this intangible networked capacity of building networks is what really defines the way or the capacity of the research infrastructure to drive certain processes. So they are not only intangible, they are very relevant and intangible effects that we need to somehow start to understand better. On top of all the four fuzzy and difficult dimensions, there is the fifth one, which is the whole concept of research infrastructures. Research infrastructures are highly contextualized environments. As already been mentioned a couple of times, the diversity of research infrastructure projects seem to be only increasing, but they are also very embedded in their regional innovation systems, national innovation systems, and that's for single-sited research infrastructures. When we come to the distributed and virtual research infrastructures, then we really talk about systems of systems. So our project is operating in this environment. And what our key goal is to come out with something, with new conceptualizations, but also conceptualizations that can be applied in practice. So I will give you a couple of indications on what are our considerations at the moment. And one of the, I think, basic premise that we came very early in the project is that any interpretation of impact assessment should be aligned with the core mission of research infrastructure. So the research infrastructure that's focused on fundamental research, their impact pathways differ to those that are really focused on more solution-oriented research. So that is one differentiation. We try to get a different typology and really test it. Second, I think that also came very strongly through all our work and also our interview campaigns with experts across the various countries of the world, is that impact assessment for research infrastructures cannot be too prescriptive. It cannot be a golden straitjacket of measurement. It will never work, but it should be viewed as a more common guidelines. So that's something that the research infrastructure can have a reference to. And there is a need to really allow flexibility in adoption of these guidelines. So what we mean is that the methodological guidelines and the guidance that we will eventually develop in 2 years' time should really have the opportunity of modularity. So if you're a research infrastructure and you know that you are very much interested in your impact of training, and for instance, impact on innovation, you can take specifically those aspects and trace them in more detail than you would do in other aspects. So this flexibility in adoption is very essential in order to drive this practice in general. Otherwise we know that how difficult it is difficult not only it's not only difficult to develop something uniform for a very diverse range of research infrastructure, it's also extremely complicated to apply something uniform. So flexibility, common guidelines, and looking after the core of the mission. The fourth point that also is very strongly echoed in all our work is that any methodologies should follow a balanced mix between quantitative and qualitative methods. There is a push in many countries from the funders and the policymaker side to use more quantitative methods. I'd say the results show that it has been counterproductive in many cases, just because research infrastructures are not able to fit in the straitjacket of pure quantification. That's why I think we as an evaluator community should work really much more on the more elaborate ways of how to use qualitative methods much better. But it also means that the research infrastructures and the funders must be really ready to view the qualitative methods as equally relevant and explanatory. The last two points are really on the challenge side, on the research infrastructure challenge side, and that's not addressed, but I think it will keep up on rising, given that we have an increasing emphasis on demonstrating socioeconomic impact. Resource and staffing issue at research infrastructures who are tasked to do this is becoming more prominent. We hear it, we still don't have many solutions, and it's most important for smaller scale research infrastructures that may not have a dedicated unit that deals with these things. And the last point, and I think it goes together with the next presentation, is that impact assessment, as I say, we are looking at processes. We are looking at processes, but what we need is a data points to really follow these processes, or at least to infer about the possible flow of these processes. So establishing data gathering routines, indicators that with the view of what impact you want to trace is absolutely crucial. These are basically backbones of any impact assessment down the road. So I think the next talk on key performance indicators and an indicator in general, that the practices, how indicators are collected and how they are established in new research infrastructures is extremely crucial in that respect. I want to conclude with a note about the project again, because the project is not that we are convening a couple of partners and a couple of partner research infrastructures and thinking hard about this topic. The project itself is very, very participatory. So we engage over almost a 2-year period with a lot of interaction with the research infrastructure community through participatory workshops, through testing and piloting and validation. So what I want you to inform is the upcoming workshops, the first participatory workshops where we will discuss these impact mechanisms in more detail, in very concrete manner. And these are the dates for the workshops. So we have the 13th of November, we have a workshop at CERN, which will focus really more on research infrastructures that deal with fundamental research as a focus area. Then on 28th of November at ALBA, that's more on the solution-oriented research infrastructures. And then 4th of December, we will try to tackle this big issue of data research infrastructures, or how to deal with really more virtual and networked infrastructures that deal with data. And that's hosted by Elixir. If you are interested, and we are very much extending this call to all the research community, please go and see the website, ripath.eu. There's a registration form, so we very much welcome people who are dedicated to this topic, interested in this topic, and want to engage more in more in-depth discussions at these workshops. So that's shortly from myself. So this is also contact for the project. So you could contact, see the website, follow the Twitter, etc.
Short question. The involvement with the research infrastructure is clear. What is the involvement of the project with the funders and the member states that are the other part in this issue of the impact assessment? And are you in any way involved with the countries, with the members, with the funders in order to understand what is required from
we have done a scoping exercise specifically among funders and policymakers about the requirements, and the conclusion has been that it's either very shallow in most of the cases, or it's almost non-existent in terms of what is required. So there is this void of requirements, I would say, from funders and policymakers that we should, I think, start to fill up with more uniform manner. So that's part of the aim. But I also want to say that the project is not working in isolation. We have, obviously, we have lots of parallel initiatives. We're working together with the OECD group that also deals with the same topic. We're working with third countries that, for instance, Canada and other hubs of experts. So what we're trying to is more reach an alignment, not only at the EU level, but try to get the best practice also worldwide. So this is the melting pot of really boiling down these ideas and kind of more uniform approach to that.
Okay, thank you. So shall we go for the third talk? This is Ornella Di Giacomo, no?
Yes.
who is going to present us this third topic that is related with the impact assessment, how to measure the achievement of our research infrastructure, how to define these key performance indicators, and how to help us funders to follow the activity of our research infrastructures.
That is ambitious, but yeah, okay, so I wanted to start with why do we need KPIs? Because we hear a lot about KPIs lately, but it's not clear what they are and why should we think about this. So essentially indicators in general, not key performance indicators, but are a very useful tool for monitoring the performance of an institution. So they are a management tool, and they allow us to take corrective actions based on evidence. So how do we know where we are if we don't measure it somehow? Then they contribute also to the communication of achievements, what Immaculada was saying. How do we convey the message to our funders that we are doing what we are supposed to do? Okay, key performance indicators can help us to do that. And they can contribute also to the evaluation of socioeconomic return, and all this contributes to the sustainability of the entity, because if we can prove to our funders that we are working well, that we are delivering what we promised, or we are moving towards that, they will be probably more prone to fund us. And key performance indicators in general, they need to be very carefully chosen. So we may have a set of monitoring indicators in general to see how our processes are going, where should we improve, but key performance indicators are the ones that are really meaningful, relevant. They are based on our strategies and objectives. So they are not 100, they are a limited number, and they are meaningful not only for us, but also for our stakeholders. They need to be accepted by the stakeholders and by the employees of the entity. So we need everybody to accept the indicators we choose, and they need to be intuitively credible. Also for non-experts, if we need to write a treaty on how to interpret a key performance indicator, probably that is not a good one. They need to be easy to monitor, and this is what you mentioned. We want to have something in place. Of course, everybody would like to know how much do we contribute to making people happy in the world, but probably that's not easy to measure. So we really need to focus on things that are easy to monitor, that we will have the possibility to track in time, and that will provide us up-to-date information. If it takes us 3 months to monitor something, then that information will not be up-to-date, so probably that is not a good key performance indicator. And they need to be robust. So as much as we can guarantee that we cannot in any way modify that indicator, so it comes from reliable sources, the better, because then we will be credible. And I quote here, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. We will see it's not exactly the case, but I found it interesting. There is a lot of debate around that. Now, for preparatory phases in particular, and here I like the comment of Harry, there are a lot of challenges, but these challenges are opportunities. You have a lot of time to do it right, to set it right from the start. So you have the opportunity to define indicators early, before you start working. So you already know what will you monitor, and you will accumulate data in time, so you can track your performance from day 0. Some of us started working and then defined the indicators, so we lost track of some of the parameters for the first years. So you have the possibility to identify them early. But the important thing of doing this process early, is that you keep in mind that indicators should reflect the objectives of the future research infrastructure, not of the project. There is a strong temptation to define key performance indicators according to the work packages. This will not work in the future. So since everybody is used to work with European projects, they are important to prove to the Commission that you did what you had to do. But when thinking into establishing a research infrastructure, you need to really think on what you will do in the future and what you will like to achieve in the future. A limited number, this is another temptation to establish 200 of key performance indicators. There's no way you can really track 200 of things, or that anybody will care about that or will read through a report of 200 of key performance indicators. So they really need to be limited and meaningful and accepted by stakeholders. If you decide this in autonomy as a preparatory phase, you may find that your stakeholders find those incomplete or not relevant. So it's important that you agree on them from the beginning, and that you have the possibility, and this is very important, to develop processes to measure whatever you want to measure early. You have not established your organization, your processes, your procedures. So you have the possibility to say, I want to measure this and this and this, and I will create a procedure in my organization to have access to those data very easily, to extract them easily. So you have this possibility. And you also have the possibility to interact with other research infrastructures, because there is some knowledge going on around, and I will show then a questionnaire of what is going around with the other infrastructures. So you can really build on the knowledge of the community. You don't need to create everything from scratch. Well, this is what has been going on lately. First, there was an expert group of ESFRI on indicators for the evaluation of the pan-European relevance of research infrastructures. This was done in 2014. Unfortunately, not all the infrastructures implemented these suggestions. Then recently, we had the EC staff working document, a Sustainable European ERISE, a call for action. Remember that document with 40 priorities. One of these priorities, one of these actions, was to assess the quality and impact of the research infrastructures and its services, developing a set of KPIs. This was again mentioned in the conference conclusions of the Bulgarian Presidency Conference for Research Infrastructures. And again, it was needed that there is a need for systemic monitoring and impact assessment that should be based on commonly agreed methodology and processes. And here then we will open a comment to define key performance indicator, but reflecting the objectives of the various ERs. So it's important to understand that we may work on a methodology, but there is always the particular character of every research infrastructure which needs to be taken into account. And the last input we had as research infrastructures were the Competitiveness Council conclusions that mentioned that member states and the Commission, within the framework of ESFRI, are invited to develop an approach for monitoring of the performance, and that they suggest research infrastructure on a voluntary basis to establish, let's say, a monitoring framework based on KPIs. So we cannot ignore what is going on around, and I think it's time we all act. We wanted to see, based on what is going on, the present status, mainly of operating research infrastructures, ERICs, and we also sent this to a preparatory phase. We teamed up with the Association of European Level Research Infrastructures, and we sent a questionnaire to them, and also to some of the ERICs. There is a position paper regarding key performance indicators. I'll leave you the link. I will not spend time on that. And we actually got 22 respondents. Half of these are ERICs, half of these are national large research infrastructures. So just to go very fast on this, I will not, this will be published, so if you are interested on the details, you will have access to all of this. Do you think that research infrastructures should have key performance indicators, and it's good that 100% really think that we should? Do you think that your governing body should be responsible for adopting? You see that in general, most of the replies are positive. So they are either already doing that, strongly agree, or agree on these principles. So since most of them are positive, I will only focus on the negative point. Would you opt for publishing KPIs in your annual report? And there were some respondents that said no. And I will come back on that, because then I will show you some of the comments. How many KPIs do you use? And here we see that 3/4 of the research infrastructures use a number that is between, let's say, 5 and 15, which is good, is manageable as a framework. We have 4, that use more than 15. So there is still some diversity going on this. And these are the comments, because we left a box for free comments. Now, this is important, that key performance indicators need to be put into context, And they should not be used to compare infrastructures. So this is one of the highest fears of infrastructures that funding agencies take to report. The key performance indicators is the same, and they just compare and say, okay, this one is better than this one, that one should be killed. This is dangerous, because of course, they need to be related to every single infrastructure. So you should use them to track how the infrastructure is moving towards its goal, but it's dangerous to compare. So there is a concern on infrastructures regarding this, that they should be accompanied by case studies and narratives. So not everything can be measured. So it's important also to describe some processes that cannot be measured easily. The development, some infrastructures are working on the development of impact indicators also, so not only performance, but also impact. And we will see, because probably this will evolve in the future. And we suppose that with projects like RI paths, we may introduce in our monitoring frameworks more impact indicators that we will change it to adapt. And very important to remember that they are specific for the research infrastructure. So we very much welcome a methodology, a common methodology framework or whatever. But one size does not fit all. We would not like to have a single list of 20 KPIs that we all should apply, because it will not work. So these are the main concerns of research infrastructures at the moment. That's it. Thank you.
While it is clear that we need the key performance indicators and the indicators of impact, do you have an idea of the number of research infrastructure, landmark infrastructure that are already using the key performance indicator and defining and helping the managers and the definition of the strategies in base of these performance indicators?
No, actually, we still have this questionnaire open, and it would be very good to have the widest participation as possible, because if we have all the landmarks participating, we could reply very easily to that. So we don't have a good representation of landmarks. There are only 2 there. So yeah, it's a pity, but we launched it during the summer, so we thank very much everybody who replied, because it arrived probably during holidays time, so it's already good that we got this level of replies.
Perhaps you could send it again?
Yeah, in that link we will, where there is the position paper, there is also the link to the survey, so it's publicly accessible from the website.
So we encourage all of you and the rest of the project
To apply, yeah.
Okay then, so now the floor is open for your questions. We start with the Massimo.
I have 2 questions, one for Elina and one for Ornella. Elina, in one of your slides, you use impact on economy and contribution to society. These 2 words, impact and contribution, they were intentional? And I would do also the question to Ornella. Ornella, I fully agree on everything you presented, and I think so we also participate soon. But even if there are 2 points. One, the issue of the number really depends on the infrastructures, because and what you want to measure. Because if we have only 4 categories to measure, you might have more than 4 indicators, even if you have only have 1 indicator in each category. And the second one, even if you have marvelous indicators that you can measure, therefore you need, for the assessment of the impact, you need a metrics, which means the threshold, the expectations. And this has to be decided well before, otherwise it's not an assessment. And I think that this is the trickiest part that you should tell us something about. Otherwise, without a metrics, the measure is impossible.
Yes, to come back to the first question, I think the proper coining would be actually contribution to both economy and society. But I think there's a notion that actually, at least along the economist side, that we handle the economic impact. You know, we have methods, we have more quantitative, sophisticated methods to kind of coin better impact. So I think that's why the choice. For the societal impact, the reason is that in general, we cannot talk about impact of research infrastructures. We should talk only about the contribution, because the activities and the processes that research infrastructures spark and they lead to effects to society, they are not the only contributors to societal processes. So they are embedded in the regional system. So we can only talk about contribution to the processes. That would be, I think, methodologically correct. But as I say, there is more inclination that we as a community know more about economy side, and we can calculate more. I don't fully agree to that, but that's currently the perception.
Hello, my name is Jose Luis.
There is another.
The second question. This is why I said you can use it to follow the trends and how much you're reaching your goals. I think the research infrastructure is the best one to say, what do you promise? So what is that number? What can you promise from the beginning? And then you can link your performance to those objectives. If you would like that to be imposed externally, I think it's quite dangerous, because nobody can know better than you what you can achieve. And you promise something against funding, and you prove that you are either reaching it or moving towards very close to that, or even overperforming. But probably the research infrastructure is the best one to know which is the target.
Difficult but necessary. Jose Luis.
Thank you. I will continue a little about this. My name is Jose Luis Martinez. I'm also an ESFRI delegate. And my question is about this key performance indicator. Really, I'm a scientist on formation, so I really like to measure something. But did you think about the collateral and negative effect of this key performance indicator? Because I will put one simple example, not for me, but I know many people in the hospital. In Spain, in the hospital, one of the criticisms is about the waiting list to visit the doctor. So immediately the politician became very nervous. So the management of the hospital was able to, because they have this key performance indicator, to reduce the so-called waiting list. So the number of days until you arrive to the doctor, from 15 days was the maximum. So the management of the hospital was able to put money in that in order to the services of the group who has longer try to reduce. What is really the final result? The number of the waiting list increase, because if someone is ready to put money, even the other services will have shorter waiting lists or waiting days immediately increase, because if you get an extra salary for that, you produce immediately. So my question is just on the basis of this example is indicators, or in top key performance indicator, has to be very, very carefully think and to think about unexpected effects, collateral effects that could be negative. So did you think about that, or how is the methodology to evaluate that?
One of the things that I didn't came over again was the fact that some research infrastructures choose not to share, not to publish their key performance indicators. And this is exactly the reason why. Because I think that probably even if funder could invest some time to understand what is going on and to read through the context. So this is the importance of the context of the indicator. You need to say what is going on around. Also, if you had, I don't know, an earthquake, probably you will have longer waiting lists because there was an event. So this is what you need to specify when you give a number. You put it into context, and you also give a narrative of what is going on, why is that moving in the sense. Of course, it is dangerous, it's tricky, and that's the reason behind why some research infrastructures choose not to publish it.
Okay. Next question, Juanjo.
Juanjo Dañobeitia, EMSO-ERIC Director General. I mean, in the context what Jose Luis was saying, I think key performance indicators is a tricky business in a way, because you should, whatever you measure, you should be comparable one to the other. If not, well, this is a qualitative approach. On the other hand, what he was saying is that if you insert a way to measure how good you are progressing, you should do it at the same time the management of the risk from the beginning, because then you have to measure exactly how much you can deviate and what are the risks from the beginning. So management of risk and key performance indicator, I guess they should be together to give credibility to what you're doing and to insert correctness to the action which are deviating for whatever you are doing from the very beginning.
Yeah, well, actually, this is why I said that they allow you also to take corrective actions, because if you see that you are performing completely different than what you expected, there is a reason. So either you are not performing well, or there is a reason behind. So you can call it risk management, yes.
Risk management is a key issue if whatever you're going to do in whatever company or the long term. The other way is, well, the other question was related to the socioeconomic impact in research infrastructure, which are at the edge of the technology and science. The timeline is completely different in impact. So you can do something now, and the impact will be coming, I don't know, in 2 years, 3 years, or whatever.
That is absolutely true, and that's the specificity of these impact assessments. But that's why I'm saying that the indicators as such and the data gathering practices are extremely important, because it's not about measuring impact, what we achieve, like one-off impact. For instance, we would measure what is the impact of PhD student careers from the training they received on research infrastructure. If we measure that at one point in time, that might give a snapshot picture which is okay, but actually doesn't tell us too much, because we don't know what should be the potential, you know, their contribution of research infrastructure. But if you do that in a longer period of time, longitudinal study, like and put this point of reference over a period of time, then you have more strength to say, this seems to be an evolution. So that's what I'm saying. Whatever data practices we put in place, it's not at the very exact moment that we will have a picture of the impact. No, but if we don't put them in place now with a view, this is what we would like to see in 10 years' time, then we would never see that, because any external evaluator who doesn't hold the practical data could make some estimations, and there are many approaches, but it wouldn't lead to anything that is proper. So that's why I'm saying that this establishment of which data we collect and why, with the key performance indicators in mind, but also with the impact in mind, is essential at the establishment stage.
It's compatible to have a picture of the moment as well.
Sorry?
It's compatible to have a picture of the moment.
It
It's useful.
is. I think that's what also funders want. But in a longer term, I'd say picture is okay. I think we all seek the numbers as well. The funders and policymakers do seek the numbers. But I think the real actually realization of the process feeling we can get only when we do it, you know, in sequence and time.
Okay, thank you. Marcus? And then Andrew.
Markus Bastiak, I'm the coordinator of the RI Train project and previously the administrative director of BBMRI ERIC. Ornella, thank you very much, especially for the recommendations for those at the preparatory phase who are starting now developing their indicators. And the importance there really is, and you mentioned that perfectly well, is to link that to your objectives, to your vision and mission, because that goes into your statutes, and that will be the objectives which the board will evaluate you on. Now, I think especially for the distributed research infrastructures is that you should also think of what are the objectives of the central hub, of your national nodes and individual research centers. And very likely you will come up with different indicators at these different levels. And when you or your board is choosing from the variety of indicators you have produced, those which are then called the key ones, limited, when we have seen the figure somewhere between 5 and 15 maybe, use indicators where you can influence, because I have seen several drafts where people would, for example, put in papers, but they have no influence in achieving or improving the situation of how to get papers out. So this is the wrong indicator in such a case. So make sure that you understand what you are measuring and only use indicators where you can actually influence, where you have a hand on. I think that's especially important at the beginning of in the preparatory phase.
Okay, thank you. Andrew?
Thanks. Andrew Smith, Head of External Relations at Elixir. So this is a theme that we're very interested in as well, and we're one of the partners in the RI Paths project. And in a way, this follows on from Marcus's recommendations as well about choosing the correct KPIs for the thing that you're trying to monitor. And my reflection is that you can almost look at this in phases, and this is what we've done in Elixir. So for the projects that are now added to the ESFRI Roadmap, they will be applying for a prep phase grant. And with any EU grant, you're assessed against implementation. And so it's very likely that for that grant, for the period and duration of it, you're going to have some project-specific KPIs that need to be in place. Because if you don't, then it's going to be very difficult to achieve the implementation score necessary to get the project funded. But they are project-specific KPIs and metrics. And then at the same time, you're going to be working on getting your infrastructure created and in place. And in the case of Elixir, we work on a 5-year scientific program. And so we have higher level KPIs and metrics in place for the budget from member states that's given at a 5-year program. And so that's another set that need to be considered as well. And then in the long term, beyond that, moving from things like KPIs to overall contributions to socio-economic impact on society, that's almost a longer term step again. So that would be my reflections, trying to think about this in phases, because you'll need some project-specific KPIs, you'll need some KPIs and metrics for the program that you're asking the member states to fund, and then in the long term, try to think about what contribution this has made towards science and the economy.
Okay, thank you. No reaction from the team, no? Okay, second. There?
Sven Fahner, working for an infrastructure called Emphasis. So we are now 19 months into the preparatory phase, and maybe we can give some interesting insight in terms of KPIs, what we see in our community when we are not really on the last mile towards operation, so we are just, I don't know, last 100 miles potentially, I guess. What we see in terms of KPIs is there's a certain facet involved in terms of you may have KPIs that, well, what you would say the same KPIs used at infrastructures throughout Europe, and when you look deeper into it, you realize that actually parts of the infrastructure measure not exactly the same thing, but they name it the same thing. So even as what seems to be an easy KPI, like number of users, can be different from infrastructure to infrastructure. And this is kind of a facet that we see, that we work on, and which may be worth keeping in mind that in this KPI thing, you have to look that you really measure the same thing that you bring outside, that you finally use for managing your infrastructure. But I guess this is part of an upcoming infrastructure and part of our task that we have in terms of working towards a joint understanding of what we measure so that we can manage throughout Europe the same thing. It's just kind of an insight after 19 months having an infrastructure on the run towards operation.
Thank you. I found this last question, and I encourage the new projects and the 2016 project for raising any question. We have almost no time, but I think this panel is for you. So don't be shy. If some of you have a question, seize this opportunity, because I think this exchange of experience, a part of learning from the infrastructure already implemented, we need to be helpful for you. So is there any other question coming from you from the new projects or 2016 projects? Any doubt, any question to the panel? You? Yeah. Well? Yeah, just a remark, on the first talk. Okay.
This enthusiastic view on impact, etc., etc. I would like just to have a very brief first remark. It could be good from a conceptual point of view to make separate societal and economic impact instead of socio-economic, which is. And second, and more important, I will draw the attention on the big workshop, European workshop, with ESFRI, organized in January at the invitation of Gregor Professore Alberto Melloni in Bologna, which was just dedicated to the topic of impact of research infrastructure. I recommend you strongly to have a look on the proceedings.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot for the point.
Thank you very much. So we have just time for the last question. Nobody? Yes? Alberto? So this is the last question, because we have to pass to the next panel.
I'm very doubtful about the question, if it is a question. Yesterday, Giorgio Rossi told us that the decline of Japanese economy in the last 20 years did not affect the investment of research infrastructure. That means that not always the key performance indicators are related to the choice that you make. And so I was wondering if the very idea of the key performance indicators should not be adapted not only in number, but also in terms of the very precise and critical definition of what the performance is. One moment ago you mentioned it as a performance, something that is not an impact on the career of the PhD, but is an impact on the fertility of the infrastructure. And so if we take the key performance indicator from the standard patterns, as is what said, probably they can also be misguiding. I always remember to myself that 10 years and 10 days ago, the key performance indicators of Lehman Brothers were very good.
True. Any comment?
I think in general, in terms of indicator setting practice, it is essential that indicators are revised over periods of time, because indicators are the ways, especially with those, GDP, it frames our understanding, but our understanding of processes, especially in this dynamic environment, changes. So it would make sense we just looked back at our old understanding and checked whether whether indicator still measures what we mean. So I think it's being done regularly. We have evolved to societal SDGs, from pure economic-oriented view. So the same thing should happen here. So we evolve together with with our understanding.
Okay, then. So with this question, we close the panel. Thank you very much to our speaker.
So thank you very much, Immaculada. Thank you very much, the lady panel. Now let's move on to the next panel. So our third panel and the last one about the legal issues, which will be moderated by José Luis Martinez. He will replace Ott Ivar Eriksson, who couldn't be here today because of sicknesses. So José is the chair of the Strategic Working Group of Physical Science and Engineering of ESFRI, and he is as well the Spanish delegate of ESFRI. If we have now fixed the microphones, I will pass by.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, I have to replace in the last moment to Odd, and actually probably I'm not really the right person to share a panel about legal issue, because I'm a scientist from my education, so probably that gives an imprint that I never ever, even if I have a big effort to be able to deal with the legal issue. And probably because always this scientific approach is always asking, why? Why that? Why? This should not be obliged. And we always try to find a new explanation, a new way. But nevertheless, I also deal with many big legal issues in the last 15 years, besides of the scientific topics. So I will try to do my best. But forgive me my mistakes, I would say. So we have a panel today with very important three people who has a lot of experience in this legal aspect, and they will really illuminate probably us about this complex aspect. So legal aspect, of course, is a very broad chantier. It's a very big one. So there are many different sides and many different phases, and I think probably I will recommend, or I will suggest to our panelists, maybe every one of each should concentrate maybe a little on different aspects. I assume due to the, let's say, the background of every one of you, that probably Andrew, who has a background in LEC and data management, probably will I hope he will address a little more about the intellectual property right and maybe this catalog of services given by the research infrastructures. Alan Wicks, that today is working in this LI, Streamlight Infrastructure, but he has a long experience in management and communication in research infrastructure. Before he was working for European Spallation Source, so he has quite an experience about how to organize and the legal aspect behind the in-kind contribution, procurement, and different aspects like that. So I suppose that he can really give us some light about this very funny and very interesting aspect. And Markus Pasterk, I saw that you have been administrative director of the BBMRI. So, and also because of your background also in research and human resources, maybe you can concentrate a little, maybe in the aspect of the staff management or the legal aspect related with the human resources. So I was told that I don't have to prepare very much because I was just replacing Odd. So I give the floor immediately to our first panelist, who is Andrew Smith from Elixir. And I heard that you will have a small presentation.
Yes. Okay, thank you, Jose Luis. So I was asked to give a short perspective on data management plans. So I actually think the topic itself goes way beyond legal aspects, but I know it needs to fit somewhere in the program. So I will try and put it in that context, although I think the subject is so much more than legal anyway. So what I'll do is just give you a short introduction to show you how Elixir progressed through its preparatory phase, because I think this is also useful context to those that have been added. So Elixir is one of the, it's now a landmark, but it was first added to the ESFRI Roadmap in 2006. And on this slide, you can see the progress that we've made through it. So our prep phase grant from the European Commission ran from 2007 to 2011. And that's when all of the groundwork was done, decisions on legal models and so on. We moved then to our interim phase from 2012 to 2013. And if I was to try and summarize why Elixir has been able to progress so fast in comparison with some other infrastructures, it's really because we had a very effective interim phase. So we had less of the issues that some other research infrastructures have from finishing their prep phase to getting established. In that interim phase, we actually, member states signed non-binding non-binding memorandum of understanding, and that allowed about 12 countries to make financial contributions to the Elixir Hub, and with that budget we were able to recruit a director and start implementing scientific projects. So even though the prep phase had finished and we didn't exist as a legal entity, we had non-binding funding from member states, voluntary, and that allowed us to make good progress. Then in 2014, the Elixir Consortium Agreement came into effect. So the legal model we use is, so if you think back to Harry's slide earlier when he set out the national, the European, and the international options, well, Elixir's is a slight deviation from the last slide. So the European Molecular Biology Laboratory, which is an intergovernmental treaty organization, it lends its legal personality to Elixir, which means that we have the rights and privileges of an intergovernmental organization, though we have entirely separate governance, funding, and members. So that's the legal model that we use in Elixir. We were then prioritized by ESFRI and the European Council in 2014. We worked through a 5-year scientific program. We became a landmark in 2016, and we have our 5th anniversary event at the end of this year, and planning towards our 5th scientific program. So that's the journey that it takes for a research infrastructure when you're added to the ESFRI Roadmap. It takes many years. So because we're an intergovernmental organization, we have membership from all of these countries, so we're a very large infrastructure, and each country that's a member creates a national node that brings together the institutes that provide scientific services. And the reason I mention this, because it's important when we start looking at data management plans. The Elixir Hub itself isn't really an entry point for users. The Elixir Hub is charged with coordination and trying to integrate and help sustain those resources, but the users themselves will access the services that are run by institutes in the Elixir nodes. So we've got over 200 institutes involved, and those countries focus and specialize in areas that are important to their science base. in Norway, for example, they're very interested in marine metagenomics and the genome of the salmon and the cod, for example. So they run a lot of data resources that scientists all over the world can access, but they do that locally through Elixir Norway. So that's the context and background to it there. The services themselves, and this moves us on to the data management aspect of it, there are many different databases run in Elixir. They're coordinated through our data platform, but that's just one part of it as well. To provide a data infrastructure, you need other technical aspects as well, like services for interoperability, for computing, for training users, and the tools part of it as well, which is providing software and analysis resources to allow people to exploit the data. So that's how we organize these services. And then we also have use cases or communities which are domain specific. So this brings together our experts in human data, rare diseases, plant sciences, marine metagenomics, proteomics, and so on. And by doing that, we can then understand the needs of different life science user communities and provide services in proteomics, metabolomics, or Galaxy software solutions that are needed for those communities. So that's how we organize the infrastructure. And if we think now about how this relates to ESFRIs, so think some of the recommendations to think about, well, a crude division of different types of ESFRIs. Some of them are themselves data infrastructures. So Elixir was set up to try and store, coordinate, and manage the data that are generated from national and EU research projects. LifeWatch, and there are probably many others on the ESFRI Roadmap, where the whole purpose of the infrastructure was about trying to create and store data from other research projects. But there are lots of, and many more infrastructures themselves, which have facilities and provide access that generates data. So lots of these in the life sciences will have physical facilities, synchrotrons or image facilities, plant phenotyping services, and of course they generate data as well. So although there's a difference between these research infrastructures, data is still a very, very strong common theme, and so that means that it needs to be thought about from the early stage of development. So in both times, even though the infrastructures are different, data management is a crucial consideration. If we think about why it's important, well, it's the best way of ensuring good return on taxpayers' money. I mean, it's publicly funded infrastructures. We need to be able to demonstrate why. And by publishing data and having an infrastructure that coordinates it, it allows others to use it and exploit that data, and that's the best way of getting maximum benefit as well. But you really need to plan this from the beginning and not think about it at the end. The first starting point when you get your prep phase, or when you apply for your prep phase grant, assuming it will be funded, is that you'll need to have a data management plan. And actually what's interesting is that Elixir didn't have a single data management plan in its prep phase grant. That's because the pilot that is now in place for all Horizon 2020 grants, which is now mandatory, that wasn't in place in FP7. So although Elixir itself was an infrastructure for data, it didn't have a single data management plan in its prep phase, which I always think is quite interesting. However, the whole purpose of the infrastructure is to help store and maintain data for others. But those of you that are now being added to the ESFRI Roadmap, you won't be able to get around it. You'll need to do a data management plan. And so now's the time to start thinking about it. There are many other funders as well. So moving aside from your prep phase grant, and this is particularly important for Elixir and perhaps some of the other data infrastructures, many national funding agencies and also other European ones like the ERC will have open data mandates as well. So here the European Research Council has recommendations for ERC awardees where they'll recommend that if they generate data in a certain area, it should be deposited in an Elixir deposition database. And so we work very closely with funders to try and understand what their needs are, what policies and mandates they have, and try to make sure that the services run by Elixir partners are able to respond to those. And then some other considerations to finish with when it comes to data management plans. So it's really important to try and tap into and learn from the experience of other ESFRIs that have been through this journey. In some cases, you might be able to use their services without needing to build your own. It doesn't make sense for 30 ESFRIs to have their own authorization and authentication infrastructure. It makes sense to try and have a smaller number of common ones, which others can use. That's the best way of trying to get efficiencies across ESFRIs. So don't always think that you'll need to create a service. It may well exist and be provided by one of the other ones as well. You also need to think closely about whether there are specific topics of concern to data management in your particular domain and discipline. And in the area of Elixir, and this is true for other medical focused infrastructures, then sensitive human data is a big topic. There are obviously lots of concerns about this, and so the whole infrastructure needs to be respondent to that. And that's not just in terms of having certain policies or a data management plan. We've tried to address this in Elixir by building the infrastructure and investing in the technical infrastructure to try and allow this to happen. And I'll give you some examples of it. So a lot of our area of activities around our human data communities. And here we've got lots of projects that try to provide safe and secure access to sensitive human data around the European Genome Phenome Archive, which is one of the databases that Elixir provides for these types of data. And in fact, we've got a concept, because there are ethical and legal rules about transferring data or not being able to from one country to another in many circumstances. Then we've got a concept of a local EGA where each country can build up its own installation, still transfer the metadata to other deposition databases in different countries, but build up its own expertise. So we've tried to use the scientific infrastructure as a way of addressing the challenges that are in place because of this issue. And then, of course, we also have an actual LC policy as well, where we work very closely with BBMRI to be able to develop this. So some final thoughts on maximizing the use of the prep phase grant, and these are general points. So try to get a balanced consortia composition for your grant. Now, balance, you can look at it from many different ways. So you need to get good balance of countries, including countries. So some will immediately say that they're interested, the ones that are wanting to host it, and there'll be a small number of them are very, very keen scientifically to take part. But you need to think in the long run as well and try and engage them early. So we had some instances in Elixir where when we developed our collaboration agreement, one of the countries that wasn't as active in the prep phase has particular national legislation that made it difficult to implement our collaboration agreement. And of course, we didn't know about this until the template had been designed and put in place, because we didn't have the regular dialogue with them because they weren't as engaged. So that's one of the things that you'll have to manage. You need to work closely with the countries that are interested, but try and future-proof whatever agreements, legal agreements you're putting in place, to try and take into effect that there is often very different national legislation in place. And you also need a good balance of skills in the consortia. So the scientists, the technologists are obviously key here, but you need to bring in the legal aspect, the legal experts as well. And what we also found in the prep phase, the early discussions were often driven by the scientists around the draft collaboration agreements and the consortium agreements. The legal experts were brought in at the end, and it would have been much easier and more effective if this had been done at the same time. So that's something that you need to think about as well. So, and finally, just learn from the successes and mistakes of other ESFRIs as well. Now that you can do that through having bilateral meetings with them, you might have very close collaborations in a particular country with another ESFRI that's strategically important for that country, and so that's something that you can do. You can also do engagement through EU projects like the cluster grants, which have been a very good way of not only developing joint services, but also informally sharing experience as well. And the local, like I say, the local in-country connections and collaborations are a very good way of trying to understand needs. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Andrew. We will continue with question after that. Now I ask to come to the floor to Alain. Probably he will give us some advice about how to organize single site or multi-site or distributed research infrastructure with the in-kind aspect, who really add some kind of flavor to the process. And he has some experience on that.
Thank you, Jose Luis. Yeah, I do have experience, and he was one of my partners for a long time in that, so it's very interesting to be working with him right this moment. So I will say just a few words about this. This is, for me, a topic where I was very operational for a long time, so I have a tendency to get into details. I try to avoid that and provide just some overview aspects that can be useful. And of course, if you have some questions, then we can talk afterwards or during the panel. But I start just a quick introduction about ELI, the Extreme Light Infrastructure Delivery Consortium, and facilities, which evolved out of a network of laser labs, university-based laser labs, which have had a long collaboration going back, I think, even to Framework 6 programs, in which they established a network of university-based laser labs, which eventually evolved into ELI, which is now a flagship facilities, for the laser research community in Europe. And I think that's somewhat typical of a lot of the ERICs that we see today and other ESFRI projects that evolve sometimes through Horizon or framework programs. Collaborations start, they go 1 or 2 years, and then it becomes obvious you need more structure to continue, and there's value in continuing the network. So the collaborations oftentimes have started bottom up in an organic way, and then once they've proven that there is some value there, then you start to see different kinds of research infrastructures. In our case at Eli, it's a multi-site research infrastructure. It's not really a distributed infrastructure in the same sense as some other ERICs are, but it doesn't matter. In any case, collaboration is key to that because you're bringing many, many players in the community together. Right now, I would say that this network that was started by Laser Lab and evolved into Eli as a flagship, this has really put Europe at the forefront of laser and photonic science. I mean, it's ahead of really every other region in the world, and you can pretty much trace the direct investment into science and research technology development into how that's spilled over into industry and how a lot of the developments have enabled European industry to really take the lead in this sector. So this is certainly an example where you can see economic and innovation impacts. We'll start our science program next year, so we're in the point of the program right now where we are now finalizing construction of the 3 facilities. If you go to visit either in Dolni Bărjane or Szeged in Hungary or Magarele in Romania, you will see buildings in place, and if you go inside the buildings, you will see equipment in place being commissioned today. You'll see, between the 3 facilities, you have 4 of the most powerful research lasers in the world, 2 10-petawatt lasers being installed in Romania right now, and one of the most average high-intense lasers in the world was installed in the Czech Republic. So altogether, these facilities are, even individually, they're world-leading facilities. Combined, I think they really represent the top. There's nothing to compare with in the US, Asia, or anywhere. Europe is leading in this field. So we will now become an ERIC this year. We submit our final application in the fall, and we're transitioning from this construction or implementation phase into operations. And not to kind of get back to the topic of collaboration and how it looks, we will at Eli be more engaged in collaborations during the operations than we actually were during construction. Doesn't mean there weren't many collaborations during construction. There were, in fact, collaborations with just about every country in Europe that's working either in lasers or has an industry supplying some aspects or components of lasers. But because of the way Eli was formed and financed through the structural funds, then if we think about the legal aspects of that, you have already a very defined framework under the structural funds. Some would say rigid framework. Some would say a framework that's not ideal for building a research infrastructure. And nevertheless, you see 3 facilities that are built more or less on time and on budget. So the discipline of the structural funds actually can't be debated. It has helped to build on time and according to budget. What it did not enable, as well as, for example, the in-kind collaborations that we had at ESS, it did not enable the collaborations within the community to evolve in a natural way. Because using the structural funds, you really have to have very legalistic and rigid contracts. And even if you have an institutional partner or a scientific partner, the contract is more or less a commercial contract, which was not the case, for example, at ESS through the in-kind agreements, where we had in-kind and we had legal agreements, but the basis of the collaboration was, the starting point was different. So I talk a little bit more about that for just a minute or two. So I think the first main message that I would like to get across in the very short time I speak with you today is collaboration management requires management. Okay, you absolutely have to think about how to manage the collaboration. And while that may seem obvious, and while many of you may already be doing that, it's not always obvious in large research infrastructures that you have to apply resources to do that. So you have to put human resources, you have to put technical resources, and you have to have financial resources for the management as a meta activity for the project. Oftentimes, all the resources get allocated to the technical aspects of the project, and the managements are left very, very lean.
And I have debated this topic for 13 years with colleagues in the scientific community, and all I can tell you is this is a form of risk management, and it simply is a form of management. You can't imagine any kind of a private organization or company where they don't invest into management. So that's one of my messages today. You have to put people in place and give them the resources to manage the collaboration explicitly. Once you do get into that kind of mode, particularly in research infrastructures, I think is very important when working with scientific and institutional partners, and even in the case with commercial or industrial partners. I think it's important to be focused on what's the goal of the project, why are we working together on this in the first place. Oftentimes we get in this mode of I'm right and I have the way to do it, which totally loses track of the goal. And the aim is not to really be right, it's to be effective and to deliver something. And particularly the management's perspective is that. Now you will oftentimes find technical solutions where people are debating, well, this is the better solution or this is the better solution. Well, neither one is a good solution if they don't get delivered, and if they don't get delivered in time. And oftentimes the solution that can be delivered quicker in time then allows a project or an institution to have time to go back later and upgrade, modify, or adapt. If you lose 2 or 3 years, which is not an unusual number to lose, particularly in the bigger technical projects that I've worked on. I understand, I recognize that some projects are not as technically oriented, but the time factor costs money. And oftentimes you anyway end up with a not optimal solution because you've lost so much time. So keep focused on the goal to be achieved, the objectives, et cetera, and try not to be right, but be effective. So recognizing in management that really the interfaces between people, that's where you manage collaborations. And you really don't manage collaborations on technical aspects. You really don't even manage collaborations, I would argue, on financial aspects. You manage it on how people are interfacing together. And my experience has been you cannot rely on ad hoc relationships to run large projects where there are time, money, and responsibility involved. You probably should structure the relationship, even if the partners on both sides the people have known each other for 20 years. Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's not even good, sometimes that works against you. But having a structure in place, having a frequent way of managing the interfaces, this is where the risk shows up and it's where the work gets done. Understand the landscape, who all is involved in a collaboration project, and I don't mean just who's directly involved, but who's involved also a little bit behind the scenes. Who's a decider but not an official or an explicit decider. Those kind of things we have to think about. And it's important when we understand the landscape in a realistic way that we have to be realistic about it. We can't always rely on a hope that something might change. And I'll talk about what that means, for example, when we look at a technical project relative to a political context. Be structured, have a process, and measure progress against that process. So you can't manage what you don't measure. If you don't have a structured process in place, then you don't know if you're making progress against that process, then you're not really managing anything. You're just kind of looking to see what got delivered today and what got commissioned. It's not really management. So going back to the idea of a landscape, I think about usually some kind of a partner or who's really trying to have something built or delivered. This is in the case of ELI or was in the case of ESS. You can have other situations where really you just have multiple partners working together in a multilateral way. That's also okay. It doesn't really change the significance of what I'm trying to demonstrate here, but in this very simple model, you have a partner and you have another partner, usually a scientific institutional partner, who's delivering something to that partner to be realized in some way so that a facility can be built, for example. In a case of in-kind, this was a pretty straightforward model. Oftentimes in technical projects, there's an industrial partner behind and the interfaces are with this partner in between, and you like to see that there's some connection here, that there's not a total disconnect between the main partner and the institutional partner. And then what's very important is to recognize who's kind of behind the scenes here, because oftentimes the financing or the funding doesn't go direct. It's not always that this partner has the financing and gives it to that partner. That can happen, and that's okay. And a lot of people like that model. They think, oh, that gives us more control over the situation because we have the money and we can control the situation. Well, really, all you control is the money. You don't control the situation. At the end of the project, it's not your goal to have the money. At the end of the project, it's your goal to have something scientific or technical delivered so that you can show a result from that. saving money, ending up with getting the money back because your contract allows you to impose penalties, and so that doesn't really help you to deliver the project on time and according to budget. So this is an important aspect of, I don't really place a whole lot of faith in where the budget sits. Oftentimes, the funding agency is either giving the money here or giving the money here directly. What is important is that the money gets to the right place in the right time. Again, my experience, almost 13 years of doing this, is oftentimes delays are not technical delays. It's delays, administrative or legal delays, because funding didn't get to the partner in time. The cash flow suffered, and the cash flow is what drives projects forward. So from that perspective, the money is important, and the cash flow has to keep flowing. And this partner, the one who needs to see the final result, who wants to be effective, that partner is responsible at the end of the day for the cash flow. You can't point the finger at this partner. This partner has to be proactive and make sure the money's flowing, because that's the partner that's delivering the results and is responsible for it. Okay? And then it gets complex, so you might have all kinds of different things. What I would say is, in collaborations, it's oftentimes very useful to have some kind of review committee, third-party review committee. This helps to arbitrate things, but it also helps to monitor progress along the way. And when we talk about progress, again, some of my colleagues here who we have worked together with know that I tend to be repetitive and repeat the same thing over, so you've seen these kind of slides before. This is a generic process. You could make up any process you want, but basically any kind of collaboration process you look at is going to have some phase of identifying partners, implementing or working together with partners, and then an acceptance phase at the end. And you could go in to these individual boxes and you could break them down into much smaller pieces to define that process much better. At ESS, we did this, and I think it was useful. I mean, you can ask Jose Luis or other partners who are here. I think it was nice to visualize the steps along the way. Another thing that's useful is to indicate to people at the early stages, like, how long is this supposed to happen? It goes back to key performance indicators. How long do you normally think it would take to negotiate a contract after you've identified a qualified scientific partner? If I speak to some of my scientific colleagues in the lab, they would expect to have an in-kind agreement, typical in-kind agreement, signed within 2 to 3 months. But the reality is really 2 to 3 years. And that's the reality. And I know that because I've spoken to people at ITER, XFEL, FAIR, LHC at CERN. I've been through the experience together at ESS, because even after you've defined the technical requirements, which is not so straightforward oftentimes, you still have to go through multiple iterations to make sure that there's a lot of other things in place. And so I think you have to be very realistic about how long just getting a contract in place takes. That's a real path just to get to that. And then the work can actually begin, and then that's another path, right? But actually, once things have been set up pretty well, I think the work going ahead becomes then very technical, and it's much easier for engineers and scientists who are involved in that. Again, it's up to those resources who are managing this to facilitate this process, because it's not really fair to ask an engineer or a scientist who doesn't have a background in this, doesn't have a training in this, and is very focused anyway on technical issues. It's not very fair to keep bothering them, in a sense, or putting the responsibility of some of these non-technical issues onto their plate. It's really important to have resources that can deal with issues like VAT, issues like employment agreements and things like this. I had to mention it, Harry, sorry. And there's a lot of things that get in the way there. And then finally, an acceptance process at the end. It's very important to put closure onto these processes, to give it some kind of closure, to say, okay, yes, we achieved. We didn't achieve according to the original specification, but that's okay. We agree. We all know what happened along the way. Let's close this out, and let's not leave this as an open issue. Let's put some closure to it. It's important for both partners, and it's very important, particularly if there's some value assigned, either real value through a commercial contract or an in-kind, where oftentimes the value is an agreed value, which may be a cost-based value or it may be something different. Yeah? So there you have a kind of overview of a generic landscape and an overview of a generic process. What I would just say, one more slide of final thoughts about this. I think it's important to think about collaborations as balanced relationships, and they should not be viewed in terms of supplier relationships. And actually, I'd even go so far as to say, I think that's even very useful in a normal supplier relationship, particularly in our sector, in scientific sector, where you're relying on not a partner just to deliver something according to the requirement, but to deliver their knowledge to you in a way, and I think it requires this interaction to be really effective. Aim to be solution-oriented and not get overwhelmed by legal and administrative issues. That again goes to my theme of manage this. Don't allow this to slow down your project. Recognize collaborations as something to be managed. It's not a risk per se, it's an opportunity. One just comment about that. You know, when I started at ESS and I saw the same at FAIR, and you see it at Ether as well, when people talk about in-kind in particular, in-kind's a risk, in-kind's a risk. In-kind's not a risk. In-kind's just an agreed way to work together. There are risks associated with in-kind, but you need to be way more specific than just saying in-kind's a risk. That's not useful, that's not helpful. What about in-kind is a risk? You mean I just signed a collaboration with one of the world's leading institutions in the world in this area, and that's risky? What's risky about that? What's risky about that is we don't know how to manage that relationship. That's what's risky about that. And I think this is really important. In-kind by itself is not a risk. Be specific, identify the real risks associated with that. One of the risks is not putting the resources on that to manage it. We see that over and over again. Strengthen the collaboration by making interactions outside the normal project scope. If they're always only talking about technical issues, then it's not good. Back up a little bit and talk about the collaboration as well. Make special meetings, workshops. We used to have best practice workshops to really talk about how are we working together and how can we improve. Those are quite useful. Allow certain issues to be handled systematically. So with a global perspective, don't just get into a crisis mode on local issues. Recognize that there's some kind of escalation process. I think that's important. And then finally, always be looking at best practices from both sides. Be open to best practices from both sides. So there's a lot more than that. But I think for now, that's enough to kind of stimulate some thinking about how collaborations can be managed more. And it's not going away, right? Collaborations is just becoming more and more the way that we interact within this European research area and in this context. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan, for this lesson of realism. What is going on? Now we have the third panelist, is Marcus, so I hope he can also illustrate a little about management and human resources aspect of the research infrastructure.
Yes. Well, thank you very much also to the two speakers. In a certain context, I'm continuing and reiterating some of the recommendations which you already have heard. So I will not talk about the legal basis of labor law and social security law, because then I would need to lecture you 28 different models, which is nonsense. The reason is that labor law and social security law, even in the European Union, is country-specific. And depending on the choice of your statutory seat, you are bound to the legal conditions of that country. Now, if you start in the preparatory phase to evaluate potentially which country to choose, that is an opportunity, because you can at least evaluate the pros and cons of labor law and social security law for your future staff in the evaluation of the advantages and disadvantages of different countries, if you have the choice. Now, next, here it is. So what I would like to just say here is, and I'm very happy that you said that just before, we very often have the situation that scientists are driven into positions, especially in research infrastructures, where they have nothing to do anymore with science and technology. And as a consequence is you need to train those people. We had extensive research done for an EU-funded project which is called RI-Train, and you see the logo, and I will show one or two slides later on about the project, is that most of the executive directors, most of the directors, first and second level in research infrastructures are coming from science, which is good, but they lack dramatic management education and training. In some cases, individuals have undergone such additional training, hands-on or formal, but very often that's not done. And very often we see, especially in smaller research infrastructures, that the scientist has to take over communication, has to take over external management, has to take over HR, has to take over whatever. without proper training. And obviously that's a suboptimal way how to run a research infrastructure. We need specialists for whatever you do. You have said it, give the necessary resources and personnel to manage that. The same for IT, the same for other aspects. So, really focusing to deliver some recommendation or some hands-on advice for those who are currently in the design phase or just have started with a preparatory phase. One of those challenges, especially in the preparatory phase concerning HR, is that people focus on science and technology. Of course, this is understandable because that is, why you exist, why you have started your endeavor. But that is also the time where you need to start thinking about human resources of your future staff. And that is very often neglected. You have seen that in the monitoring and evaluation system, Giorgio explained us in the morning, is that HR questions are evaluated, that HR staffing are being considered more and more, because you just can't develop your research infrastructure, and once you are operational, start thinking of, how shall that be run. So start from the beginning, think of what is the future staff, what are the competencies of the staff you want to involve, and start thinking about HR plans. So some of the key recommendations. First of all, start early enough. And you can't actually start too early. Start right at the beginning because your staffing plans, your competency profiles will very likely influence your condition, where you want to go to, what kind of national nodes you want to establish, if you are distributed research infrastructure, etc. Include the competency profiles. Think about what these people should have been trained on, not only in the scientific and technological area, but also in the management area of your research infrastructure, because that will be the basis for the tenders. We have had in my previous job as administrative director of BBMRI ERIC, we had the situation that we had been delegated national directors who do not understand their business well enough. And we had to accept them because we haven't thought about a process by which you explain the countries what kind of profiles you would want to have for your national directors, for example. Discuss with the legal structure. That's really important. Discuss along with the legal structure, the options of the legal structure, the relevant employment issues. Do you plan to have only secondments in your central hub, or do you want to employ people? If you employ people, what is the basis for it? Do you plan to have long-term contracts or not? Do you want to hire people because you're located at the university next to it? What is the advantage you provide to your future staff compared to academia so that you can attract them? You need to be better. Either you have higher salaries, or you have better social contributions, or whatever it is, because at the beginning it really is problematic to get good staff in here, especially when you are in remote areas. I mean, if you're in capitals, that's less an issue, but if your headquarters is somewhere in a very remote area, you need to provide some benefits. Plan the resources to train the people. Very likely you will get people, but they will need additional training, especially at the beginning. And plan the resources to have those people trained even on a regular basis. We have seen several projects now, which I will show you in a second on RI training, but I said, I would love to go into training, but my research infrastructure hasn't planned for any funding for training, which is crazy, especially when you are at the beginning. And then, you have said it before, learn from existing models. You don't need to reinvent everything. There are a lot of models out there, maybe not all, but there is so much knowledge out there. Use the ERIC Forum, for example. where we have special seminars on HR questions. We had one last year in Graz, for example. So use the existing resources, use the existing knowledge along your deliberations. Now, a little bit about RI Train, because that's quite a nice tool, which also can serve you, especially those of you who are in the current preparatory phase. The project really was to develop the competencies around management functions in research infrastructures, because they are different compared to academia or compared to industry. Map that with what's out there. And develop different tools. The most important one was an executive MBA, which is now running in its second time. We have 2 people here in the audience participating from the first run to really have a better understanding of how to manage research infrastructure. I have spoken to many directors or executive directors of different research infrastructures who can't read a balance sheet, who don't understand the profit and loss sheet. And this, you don't need, no one will ask you to prepare one, but you need to be able to read one if you are the CEO of an enterprise. Now, wherever you get the training, I mean, it doesn't matter, but this is one example where you can get quite a nice training. And I'll show you just one more slide. Is about the executive MBA. As I said, it's a second round. We are running it now. It really is for first and second level managers. In the first round, we had almost 130 applicants. We have chosen 25 people running through that. There is a lot of institutional competency at the University of Milano-Bicocca, at the management school, but we also are including a lot of visiting faculty. Most of them come from existing research infrastructures, and that's a very competitive and very, I think, interesting way how to acquire the necessary management competencies for research infrastructure. It's over 3 semesters, it's 60 ECTS, you get an MBA from Milano-Bicocca, and all the information obviously can be found on the website. You can choose some of the modules. It's really dedicated towards research infrastructure, so there is always a theoretical part and a practical part really going into the details about research infrastructure. In summary, labor law, social security law, HR questions are tricky. Get experts in as early as possible. Start thinking about your competence profiles of the staff you want to involve. Once you have that, include that into your business planning. And once you have the people in, have the resources so that you can train them, if necessary, so that they can fill up their competencies or even improve that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think it's a little late, but we have time for questions. And I would like to continue a little about this line, because in my life I have some experience with human resources in 2 different, supposed to be extreme cases, France and Scandinavian countries. And I will say also a little message that even, I would say, the model of France is supposed to be a very rigid model. Everything is defined. The Code de Travail has, I don't know, thousands of articles try to define every situation. And by contrast, the Scandinavian model is more a British model. It's that nothing is defined. There are no working law. Everything should be a negotiation inside the company. Well, my experience is at the end of the day, it's easier with a very rigid model like the French, because the French administration was really interested in the research infrastructure. I'm talking about the Grenoble site infrastructure. And you really pass to the parliament, exception to the law, and it's very easy. But you have to put in the high-level statutes this kind of possibility, like 5-year contract and things like that. By contrast, the other model was supposed to be perfect because it's only a negotiation at the level of the company. Forget about it. So the message is try to put some of the condition of the working condition in the very high level statutes, who really is approved by all the countries and at the level. Of course, sometimes it's difficult. So now question, please.
Sanna Sorvari Sundet from Actress. Once again, thank you for all the comments. I really wanted I liked your points, and I fully agree with all of them. But the reality where I'm living is that I'm now establishing a second ERIC, and I have the same struggle. I'm trying to get this message through that the coordination is a management, and that especially in the distributed research infrastructure, it is the internal coordination is extremely important, and it's also costly. The same applies for the human resources, training of the staff. When I'm proposing these to the countries as a budget for the concept for the head office, for example, they are always declined. They are never seen. These are the places where there is an extra resources not really needed for operationally run the business. And I don't know what is the problem. Is the problem that when the first ERICs were set up, that they were too modest in their budgets? And now there is this model that I'm fighting against, these windmills all the time, trying to explain that the coordination is actually risk management. So I really like these kind of messages to be spread everyone to our stakeholders, really to understand that this is costly, but in the end it's saving a lot of money and hassle and time. And I think that there's a lot of cost benefits to this. So my recommendation for all of you are now in the beginning of the preparatory phase, please consider that also in your budgets. Don't be too modest, because otherwise we will never reach the real level of doing this in a professional manner. Thank you.
Thank you.
There was a comment here.
Some more? Yes, please.
I'm Pirjo Kontkanen from the University of Helsinki. I represent ICOS ERIC here. I'm legal counsel for ICOS ERIC, but I work also in Actris, EPOS. So I've worked for many infrastructures, helped to establish them. And I would like to concur what Elixir said. From my experience, get the lawyers involved early, because I have the experience, for one thing, there aren't so many lawyers in the institutions who understand what these infrastructures are. When you give them a contract which is supposed to have these distributed entities somehow linked to the ERIC, they think it's a project. And they don't know there are these policies you are supposed to expect. You have a lot of explaining unless they are involved from the beginning. But it's hard work to get them. I mean, I'm an actress, and we have one other lawyer attending our meetings from France. So that's very essential, because you waste time unless you do that. So get them really, but try to find those.
Okay. Some more questions? Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. Mike Donoghue from IBISBA. All of the comments and information we've had from the panel was really interesting. I regretted a little bit we didn't spend a little bit more time on data management plans. Thinking of Andrew's discussion. I've started to do one, and it's a very difficult exercise. And I was wondering, one of the things that I found most difficult, and maybe Andrew, you could comment on that, is data governance, which is quite a frightening question.
Yep. Andrew? Sure, yeah. So, I mean, my reflections on this, and to come back to one of the points that I made, so Elixir itself in the prep phase didn't have its own project-specific data management plan because it wasn't needed at that time, but it will be for you now and for others. And I think the thing to think about firstly is what data are going to be generated through the project itself. So obviously the purpose of this data management policy is about research data. And in your prep phase, you're going to be generating lots of different types of data, and probably most of it will be classed as project data rather than research data, but you still need to take a view about what will happen. I mean, you could have some scientific studies or pilot studies that are done where research data are actually generated, but what we found in Elixir was most of it is project-specific data, so it wasn't help to driving forward other people's scientific publications. It was about the structures, it was about the legal models, it was about funding models and so on, but yet you will still need to do it. On the topic of governance, so if you think back to the slide that I showed, which had the hub and spokes model of Elixir, so the central coordination office based in the headquarters, but the services run by the nodes along the outside of the wheel, well, they are the institutes that run the services, and so that's where responsibility for data management sits, and each resource has its own policy, rules on access, IP, and so on. So what we found we needed to do, this may be the case for you, is you need to take a complete picture of it and make sure that it's the services themselves make sure that the responsibility sits with those that are providing access to the services. So for issues of data governance, and that's how we've approached this in Elixir.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, I would like just to make a comment on this point, because I believe it's one of the several challenging for the legal aspects. And the comment is the following. Especially for distributed research infrastructure, when you have a distributed delivery framework with many numerous national nodes with different organizations, achieving the data management plan is not unique. So EPOS is like Elixir. We will not have a single data management plan. But data management plan is a prerequisite also for ESFRI, for the European Commission. Therefore, I think that we need a discussion on the timeline for achieving a data management plan. Honestly speaking, now we can say, becoming a landmark, the most difficult discussion we had was with the data management plan to convince ESFRI the reason why we have a timeline to achieve this data management plan. And today we are still not able, because we are even fighting with the capability of the individual research organization to have a data policy. We have 138 research organizations involved. And in many of these organizations, they don't have an approved data policy. Therefore, having a data management plan harmonized somewhat requires times. And therefore, we need to discuss with ESFRI and with the Commission for the this criteria of having a data management plan has to be at least synchronized in time. Otherwise, it could be a very tough indicator.
Yes, thank you. We need really coherence in this kind of diversity, which is very good for Europe, but we need also some coherence. Yes?
Because we had some issues like that. We talked a lot about that at ESS as well. We had a data management center. They have at ESS now. We're talking about how to do it at Eli now. But I think one of the real kind of personal issues, maybe I just don't get the full, we don't have really a common language in talking about this. You say data management, you have issue. I mean, that's like saying I have a problem with space. I mean, we need a more specific language around what do you mean data? Do you mean management data? Do you mean user-generated data? Do you mean data that the infrastructures already have in place that's going to be used at the... And I know that there are specific conversations about that. There are even big projects now being launched to start to deal with these issues. And for those who are working specifically on the issues, then I think, there probably is some clarity. But on the other hand, for the other 99%, it's really difficult to have even a meaningful conversation about that because it's not specific enough. And I think a lot of people think in terms of research-generated data. But this is not only a problem for research infrastructures. We're talking about data policies in every aspect of our life right now. So this is not only something coming out of research infrastructures right now. This is something that, but I think, again, if you don't have resources and you're not managing it, then it's just a conversation. It's not really, moving forward.
Okay. I think it's rather late, so we have a very long day. And we have another event who probably start already or is starting. So I will close the session, and I really thank all of you for the questions, and especially to the panelists for the very wise advice that we receive from the experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jose, very much for moderating this last panel. And we have provided general question and answer session, but we said we will include this in each panel, or to put this after each panel. So I think we are quite exhausted now. Anyhow, if there's an urgent question rising now, please would you like to address this? And because unfortunately our ESFRI Vice Chair had to leave, Jan Huzak had to leave for the ESFRI, so I will take this up and I moderate the session. Just in case you, is there any question, urgent question coming up? If this is not a case, so I just would like to summarize. Today we we heard a lot about of challenging and different options senior ESFRI projects of research infrastructure projects were confronted with, but we also heard a lot about technical advisors to find valuable solutions and not to start from scratch. And I would like now to give the floor to Giorgio, who will now summarize the main points and wrap up of the workshop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beate, again for organizing all this. And thanks to all the participants for the contributions and for the questions and the debate that confirm to me that this formula of the exchange of experience is a meaningful one, and it has become a practice for ESFRI. Now, we have touched several key issues in the progress of research infrastructure towards implementation. My perception is that there are aspects that are becoming clear, and there are some good practices that can effectively be models for new projects that are at an earlier part in the process. So I thought that the governance panel was, including a new landmark and a relatively new project, could identify dimensions that were rather well understood, both in the problematic aspects and in the practical aspects. The preparatory phase as well is an instrument that is, I would say, well rooted by now. It went through a learning process as everything, but now it's clear enough, both from the aims and purposes of the Commission and for the benefits and way to use it experienced by several projects. A big discussion on these key performance indicators. This is becoming a mantra now. We have words and keywords that every 3-4 years become something that attracts and condensates our discussions. I would like to suggest to keep the focus of what research infrastructures are in developing this. Research infrastructures are a way to optimize the investment in research. So they are a way to multiply, to amplify the amount of high quality research that is produced by the existing scientific community. So the fundamental key performance indicator is try to demonstrate. It's not easy. It's not easy because the database may be hard to find, but I would strongly suggest try to find out reliable data on what is the expenditure in your field, in the field that your infrastructure will serve. University professors, institutes, research, existing collaborations, and understand what is the added value with respect to that. So don't work hard on key performance indicator on societal benefits. Nobody will believe those. Even if you do that can be in the narrative. That can be the general packaging of your message. Don't build up very complex, indicators on something that will not be perceived as convincing. Build indicators in demonstrating that you prompt a higher level of productivity in quality and in quantity in a given domain. If we had the infrastructure in archaeology, it would be important to know how much Europe is spending in archaeology, how many people are there, how much is their productivity, how much the new infrastructure is adding to that and is costing with respect to this envelope. So this, to me, is the fundamental key performance indicator of the paradigm of research infrastructures with respect to distributed funding at individual laboratories, individual universities. That's our metrology. It's not hard, it's not easy to gather these numbers, but I would concentrate to that rather than to making more general communication, because it may be tempting to try to communicate to the public how important is an infrastructure. That you can tell with words. But when you come to the ministry and say, well, we are really worth, a good indicator should show you are spending that much. You didn't even know, but we studied and we can tell you that you are spending that much in this field. With this extra or just with this reorganization of your budget, we can have a big return. And this is generic. All research infrastructures are there for this scope, whatever field, whatever single, multiple, distributed format. Increase the research, training. Training is another thing in which you can develop your key performance indicator. We keep saying Europe will need 500,000 big data practitioners in the next few years to maintain decent competitiveness with respect to the rest of the world. Every research infrastructure has an important data infrastructure component. Evaluate how much you can exploit that also for training, for getting credits from universities, or concentrate on that. That is again a metrology that you can have, and you can quote how much your infrastructure is contributing on something that your stakeholder and financing authority can perceive, understand, and appreciate. Legal. Again, I think on the legal statuses we have made a big progress. The ERIC has been adjusted in the way of understanding and using it, and it's a good instrument. Other alternative instruments can be used temporarily or semi-permanently. So I think, and we had a presentation from the extreme legal issues infrastructure, or the extreme light infrastructure, which demonstrated that that can even work. And that is, I think, on that level, some progress and, again, exchange of good practices is possible and has occurred. The management in kind is a risk. Yes, the big, large infrastructure who's heavily adopted in kind had as a risk getting 20 million from the Commission to help them in learning how to do it. So there are risks that are not necessarily to be worried about, but I fully subscribe what Ellen Weeks said. Everything is a risk. You just have to try to work it out step by step as clearly and as transparently as possible to be effective. Something that I like to note is that we start having manager circulation among the infrastructures. This is very important. Knowledge goes with people who have accumulated experiences. So hardly just exchanging papers, you transfer real knowledge. And if we have people that, if our infrastructures are coming to the maturity level that they can offer opportunities for people to move and carry their own experience, then this is a very good sign. It's a very healthy sign. And I would say these people should also be motors for further training. And so something maybe not as dramatic as an avalanche process, but an incremental process through all the training, specific training program, but also from practicing. And the bigger an infrastructure gets, the more I think should invest also in training on the managerial level. And so the planning human resources has been said is very important. And let me say something that is also important. Planning leadership. Research infrastructures start as one-man orchestras or something like that. A small community identifies a leader, and he or she works hard to start the process and bring it to having a first shape. And this is great, but once, and it's normal, and so we identify, all of our infrastructures are more or less identified with a small number of people in each of them. Then it comes to the point that if you want to make it solid, the human resource planning should include also renewal of leadership, changing roles of the seniors into still useful but not as central roles, because that is, again, if you can do it, it means that the enterprise is healthy. If you cannot yet do it, you should make an effort to reach that level, because as we say, the life cycle, research infrastructure has to operate for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and so automatically has to have built in the way to make people growing to the potentiality of carrying it on. Okay, so I think I don't have more to say than wishing all projects and all landmarks and all colleagues interested in this all the best for the rest of the week, for the rest of their life as well, of course. But we are going to learn about the international dimension. And thanks again to Beate for this workshop.
Thank you, Georgi, very much. So before I'm officially closing the workshop, I would like to mention something which is of interest of especially the new projects. So as already mentioned, we will have now, after the closure of this workshop, a light lunch, and then at 2 o'clock we will change this room. So at 2 o'clock we will start with bilateral meetings. I have indicated this individually to the target group. So this will happen here, and there will be two tables where representatives of the European Commission and you will discuss on separated tables your issues. If there's not clear, you can come later on in the during the lunchtime, and I will make it much more clear. So now, of course, as always after a workshop, for me, I learned a lot today, and I hope that the workshop was helpful to find suitable answers to your question, and we of course will summarize the main outcome in a report which will be published on the ESFRI website. So before we will invite you to a light lunch outside this room, I would like to take the opportunity to thank, first of all the speakers for their very valuable contribution, and I hope this will help you as coordinators of new ESFRI research infrastructure projects to the next step towards implementation. I would like to thank as well my colleague Sabine Hertgen and her team from the Austrian Ministry for her support in hosting this workshop in Vienna. And a special thanks goes as well to my colleague Ambra and Petra, and of course to my colleagues from Stress-Free Project, who supported me in the preparation of this workshop. And as well, thank you very much to the European Commission. And last but not least, I thank you, the participants, for the lively debate we have had, and I wish you now, all of you, a pleasant and safe trip home, and enjoy the lunch. Thank you very much.